What I did find interesting is that they primarily cite case law from the Court of Justice of the European Union, and that in turn quotes the European Court of Human Rights. I think most listeners here by now will be familiar with the infamous case of Goodwin from the European Court of Human Rights, which really sort of paved the way for the Gender Recognition Act in the UK itself. So this involved a case of a man who underwent surgery, claimed to be a woman, and he was in a relationship with a man and couldn't marry because he couldn't change his birth certificate. So under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights, on the right to family life, he filed a case in the ECHR and won. And the ECHR said that in denying legal recognition to him, they were frustrating his right to a family life. But it's interesting to see that all of this again comes back to the fact that same-sex marriage was not allowed, because if that had been the case, the necessity for this case would not have arisen. He still had his original birth certificate, and a male could not marry another male. And that's why this route was resorted to, as saying it's because I can't be recognized as a woman that I can't get married. But the core of the problem in Goodwin and in a lot of the cases that followed, which pretty much starts the mess legally in the European sphere, is because of the lack of marriage equality. It's also interesting, I'm not sure if this has been covered before, but of course, in the ECHR decision, they do highlight that because gender identity is now a recognized medical condition, and given the state of medical knowledge on this, that the court in that case said it is wrong to not give him legal recognition as a woman. And it was this case that pushed forward for gender recognition in the UK. And of course, the fact that there was treatment. So hopefully, if the provision of treatment to undergo surgery and to get rid of sex characteristics is successful, perhaps judges will reconsider. But the sad truth is, with this case and everything that followed, gender became a thing in most European countries' laws. The CJEU, however, is a bit more interesting. The report itself repeatedly cites these cases from the Court of Justice of the European Union. For those of you here who are familiar with European hierarchy, the CJEU decides on matters of EU law, and it is supreme on those issues. So in this case, again, this person was not able to get married. And because they were not able to get married, they were not able to access their partner's pensions, everything. In this case, it was actually a woman who had undergone surgery and claimed to be in a relationship with a woman, but wanted to get married. And because of the lack of legislation allowing people from the same sex to marry, and what the CJEU basically said, this is a heterosexual couple and they want to get married. And because you're not giving them kind of legal gender recognition, they're not able to get married. So what they actually said in this case, KB versus National Health Services, is that you can't have legislation that prevents a heterosexual couple from getting married. However, what institutions like the EIGE use is to say that the CJEU said that this non-recognition of legal gender is against human rights. That's not actually what the CJEU said. In fact, in this judgment, in paragraph 33, the court clearly says it is up to national courts and national laws to decide whether to recognize the gender of a person. This case turns up in a lot of EU documents. It turns up in a lot of their propaganda to state that the CJEU has said there should be legal recognition of gender, but it's not actually what the court said. There's also another case that they repeatedly use, Richard versus Secretary of State for Work. This guy basically wanted to retire at age 60 after undergoing surgery, which was the retirement age for women and not for men. And the Secretary of State for Work said, well, no, you're actually a male, so you can only retire at 65. And so he filed a case in the CJEU. In this case, it's not very good for us, because it says that if we're trying to bring about progressive equality in terms of between men and women, then we have to include discrimination arising from gender reassignment, because this guy who had undergone surgery wanted to get his pension earlier. And this case, in fact, does state that the notion of gender equality must require a progressive implementation and uses Directive 79/7. I focused on these three cases because they are, of course, large sources of authority for reports like this. And I did want to highlight that sometimes they twist what the case was about in order to make their own argument.